I'm Amy from moonmindology.com, and today I am looking at the chart of China. I have said before that I don't like the chart that the people tend to use for China, and this is the 1912 chart of the Chinese Revolution, and there's no way that China went through what it went through back then compared to now, that it's been operated under the same chart since the 80s. So after a bit of research, I found the event that changed China into the superpower it is today. And this was the third plenary session of the 11th Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And this was held 18th of December 1978. And it began at 9 a.m. in the Jingxi Hotel in Western Beijing. So Mars on the ascendant, it's aggressive, and like Kali, they dance on the battlefield laughing because they know how to play the game and they are cutthroat. Mars in the first is all about weapons, aggression, military, police, doctors, cutting, and even epidemics. Mars is all about the self as well as the GDP per capita, and stocks, especially in metals, machines and masculine things, so stocks in those areas. And there's an aggression in the first house which sums up the nature of the nation and how the world perceives them. And this also creates a fearsome nature as well as growth and control. And this can also be indicative of asserting dominance and using force to get their own way, or even to get more money or more investments. The sun is in the first house, and this is a double representation of the body, the life force, and this is a stubborn nation with a powerful ego, and the leader is right at the helm. There's an incredible temper, impatience, and a hammer drill type willpower that can get through or destroy anything in its way or in the way of what it wants. And the sun is also a natural karaka for the government. So this means it's very strong, controlling and aggressive, especially as Mars and the sun are conjunct. And what I will say about this combination is it's very masculine, and I think of things that were forged in fire and fury. And a lot of power sits with manufacturing, and of course this is absolutely true. This is the driving force of the country, and this is down to the leaders of China being able to forcefully negotiate deals. Of course, it makes the nation incredibly impulsive, aggressive, competitive and hot. There's a lot of heat, which means there can be a lot of drought and fire. Scorched land. Don't go there to farm, I'd say. The ruler of the ascendant is Jupiter, which is exalted and sits in the 8th house. This is your debts, inequality, taxation, and government. And there is an oppressive theme happening here with the 8th. And what sign is it in? Cancer. That's a representation of the family, home, land, and farming. Another fascinating thing is that Jupiter is the liver. And when it's exalted in the 8th house, it can be a little bit too much energy and evil for the liver. China has a huge problem with liver cancer and cirrhosis of the liver. Jupiter is also religion, and in China there are only a few religions that are allowed, and they are very, very strict on this. Jupiter also deals with the circulation of wealth. The country doesn't go into the dasha of Jupiter until 2046, but that could really bring potential problems with diseases and war at the far end of it. But there can also be a lot of restriction and taxation. And I think for the most part, unless a major shift takes place, this could be quite a comfortable period for China, but in the future. This is further driven home that the first part of 2023, the dasha was Mars and Jupiter, and that was a bad year. Either way, this is a long time away, but it could be related to taxation, debts, inequality, crime, oppression, and illness. And then you look at the sign, and this is really going to impact small community, families, and agriculture. Jupiter is sitting on the star South Ocellus. Now this star can be associated with aggression and violence, and Jupiter is sitting very close to it. And it's great for the military strength, and other nations need to be aware of that. There can also be accidents and events that bring a lot of death with this, and it is said that this star has a similar energy to both the Sun and Mars. We look at the ascendant and we see that energy repeated. And there is also a link to blindness. So the leader can be blind to certain situations. China has to watch out when Jupiter is creating a lot of influence. Cancer is ruled by the moon, which is in the 8th house. It's strong as well as being bright. Longevity is really going to be a positive. And so this isn't going to be a chart that is going to easily crumble. Over time, China will get stronger and stronger in the 8th house, like with affairs like taxation, science, and they will have more money than other nations. And we can already see that happening. The moon is still under a negative influence from the 8th house, and it is also afflicted by Mars. So the emotional tolerances of this chart is really poor. And I get the impression perhaps a leader flying off the handle and being quite frightening, especially to the rest of the world. But there can also be problems with the nurture, especially as the moon is in Pushya, and it's a very soft, it's a very priestly but not soft nakshatra, and it can be more about raising the children correctly instead of nurturing them, and this can spill out into the public, the water supplies, oil, ocean, and even public opinion. And this can also represent crops and agriculture as well. A lot of farmers in China are very poor, and there is an increase of land being lost to industrialization and of course pollution. And there is also the case of poor support from the government and lack of insurance in the case of disaster. That is a huge financial risk. Moon and Jupiter conjunct, and this is a Gayakasari yoga, and it will give a good reputation and make them highly respected, which of course they are. And they will be good networking with networking links, which is probably what has enabled China to establish such good trade relations around the world. On to K2. The 3rd house is about communication, and there can be poor communication with K2 being here, as it's a malefic. However, we know that this planet tends to have a positive impact by looking at the previous dashas. I keep saying dasha wrong, it's dasha. And this can bring a lot of public travel and industrialization, as this is the 3rd house. More people will probably have personal freedoms, cars, ability to move and travel with this chart. And there is more education and greater opportunities. And this has really been driven home by the fact that in the 80s, the travel industry opened up, and this coincides with the beginning of this chart, but also the first Dashar cycle, which was K2. And then we have a look at Saturn, and it's not particularly happy in Leo, but it's the 9th house, which is a positive thing. Again, this is a sign that the father figure and the teacher is very slow and very regimented. The schooling system can be cruel, overly controlling or restrictive, and there can also be limited travel for a good proportion of people. There can also be problems with foreigners as well, but I'm not sure how that plays out in real life. But what I do know is Saturn is the stuff of underground, or it's underground, and it represents oil and other things that are beneath the surface. As Saturn aspects a very strong Venus exactly, I would say that they're very, very good at extracting precious things such as diamonds and minerals. There is a lot of mining in China, and that is because they have access to a lot of resources. And you can see this as well by the fact that Rahu is involved. Rahu can push and pull, where Saturn is trying to reduce and Rahu is trying to expand. And the problem is that Saturn can bring insolvency and problems. Saturn also represents the elderly population, so I would hazard a guess that the elderly don't get proper pensions or care. Saturn's also farming, so I would wonder whether farming tends to be owned more by big rich people, yet the work is performed by very poor and underpaid people. Luckily, China won't be going into these dashas until 2040. But Rahu can really ramp up confusion with foreigners and foreign religions as well. The father of the chart, I can only assume, is the leader, and with Rahu here, fanatic and extreme. And there can even be extreme religions as well. Learning and teachers can be very strict, which is probably why the Chinese overall tend to exhibit really great study skills. Rahu is sitting on a fixed star called Denebula, and this is about criticism, perseverance, control, mental illness, disease and natural disasters, as well as despair. And when I look at the dashas, Rahu was active during 2018 to 2021, and there was obviously a lot of death and disaster during this time, especially during COVID. Before that, during 2007, you had bird flu, floods that caused death, mine explosions, mine entrapments, which are important because Saturn is about mining as well. Steel workers are also associated with Saturn, and there was a terrible accident in a steelworks where a ladle of liquid steel gave way and it killed 32 people. And there was also, around that time, there were landslides. They were a theme all throughout that year. And these are all elements of Rahu creating extreme situation and also pulling Saturn's meanings into the mix as well. So Pluto is in the 10th house, and this is a house of authority with a planet of absolute power. And this looks a lot like a dictator. However, when it is in Virgo, the general energy of it is for the greater good, the welfare and service of the people. And I think the leaders genuinely believe that as well. Equally, that you could say that Xi Jinping has done wonders for the people of China, and they are much better off today than they have been in a long time. But it's still an unstoppable power that is not something that is going to change. This is the 10th house, so the whole nation appears incredibly aggressive and strong to the rest of the world, Plutonian, and it's a force to be reckoned with. And most people are intimidated or scared by China, well, except Donald Trump. Lastly, we have Uranus and Venus in the 11th house. The 11th is alliances, friendships, contracts, and trade. Venus is so happy here, and it is wonderful. And there's a rich culture and incredible wealth beyond imagination. With Uranus here, it's technology and things of high value, as well as luxury. Uranus can bring sudden changes, and this combination can also include weapons. Alliances can bounce backwards and forwards because Uranus can make it very unstable. And there'll also be a lot of intuitive ideas and investments. For instance, look at Tesla. A lot of the technology is made in China. That's an eccentric luxury. Equally, battery technology, they're saying that China is very quickly catching up because they're making most of this stuff over there, manufacturing it, and they'll probably start producing their own advanced tech very soon. I'm pretty sure I saw a news headline about patents for flying cars to do with China as well. But, you know, the truth is you've got the people at the bottom, and it's all owned by the insanely rich, which unfortunately it's the same world over. Interestingly, this Venus Dasha was from the 80s to 2005, and this was the fastest growing period of the Chinese economy. The inflation was also huge around this time, which is driven by that extreme money situation and the instability of Uranus. Finally, we have the 12th house, and this is about secret agencies, crime, prisons, asylum, and things that are behind the scenes. Neptune being here can really create a mysterious underground scene of potential crime and smuggling. And there can also be public health issues that come from science and conspiracies with banking and tax system. The public welfare can also be hit and miss, or the lines can be blurred. One theme that I am seeing a lot of is something that is very secret. With Mercury here, it could be pointing to what is other than science and banking, the media, education system, and there may be some kind of ulterior motive there. Of course, we know that most, if not all, media is controlled by the CCP, and there is a lot of supervision. In fact, according to the internet, there are harsh penalties to journalists for spreading false information. Interestingly, after this chart was born, if you like, China moved into having more independent media as opposed to state media, but it was under tight control of the government. The 12th house is such a tricky thing, and I'm sure that there's more to glean here, but it's obscured. I would say that Neptune being in the 12th gives you very secret agents who can operate within the media or even with banks, science, and there can also be foreign agencies that work for them. I quite like this chart for China. I think it sums everything up nicely. I don't think China is going to be impacted at all by any trade or tariff things, but China is ready to bear its teeth no matter the cost. Look at the dashas. China is on the up and up, and the only way around this is, if America wants to have some kind of trade disagreement, they have to make a deal, and they'll either figure that out and have a trade deal, or America will have to diversify eventually. The dashas tell us that they are currently in a cycle of strength, especially up to 2029. Venus in the 11th, and it is so happy here, which tells me that the last 20 years have been about luxury, exports, relationships, trade, goods, and also the development of their own stock exchange. And this would have been since around about 2010. China also had recent surges in wealth during 2024, which coincides with the bhukti of Saturn, and Saturn is about your mining, and I would say that they really would have ramped up their exploration and extraction of minerals. An interesting little fact about China and mined minerals: China cut their export and they have driven up global prices by creating scarcity, and that matches the Rahu and Saturn energy of constriction and expansion. And this is how they've done so well during this bhukti period, and they've taken almost the literal meanings of Saturn and run with it to prosper greatly. China will be going into the next dasha of Mercury, and luckily we have seen a Mahadasha, so we can judge some of the nuances. The main period of Mercury was between 1986 and 2003, and in the beginning we saw a lot of protests, a lot of demonstrations, and then in 1986, so that was in 1986, and then in 1989 we had the Tiananmen Square disaster, and during that period there was a lot of unrest that we don't tend to talk about, and there were economic reforms that created more inequality and resulted in the closures of a lot of factories. Land was taken from the farmers, but equally you saw a lot of growth economically for the country. It just impacted the individuals, and the government saw that as acceptable, I guess. And you also had the beginning of the ethnic unrest, where the Uyghur groups of Xinjiang protested for independence, and we also saw the Falun Gong movement in 1999, and the government declared that an illegal cult. Moreover, it is said that both Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners complain of human rights abuses against them, even to this day. So Mercury had a long-standing effect, and there are secrets and confusion due to that 12th house influence, Neptune, and it's also in Scorpio. This is minor, but there was a crackdown on internet use as well. So you had dissidents fighting against cyber censorship. So the internet could play a part in events too. Now, I want to hone in on the period of 1990 to 1993 because this is the opposite to the Dasha China will be having next year. What events? So after the Tiananmen Square massacre, there was a lot of oppression and censorship. The government celebrated the crackdown and isolation. Equally, it was about market reforms, and the poor would have kind of been sacrificed as the 12th house. However, Deng Xiaoping's Southern Tour speech pushed reforms and made significant changes to the country. The CCP ideology shifted towards a socialist market economy, which encouraged and rewarded capitalism. The years after, this brought a surge in the GDP growth, especially what we see today. So what does that mean for the coming Dasha? I've got to get that right. I realised I've been pronouncing Dasha wrong, and I'm trying. Bear with me. So for one, we can see protests in this next Dasha, crime, confusion, secret organisations, whether that be on behalf of the people or the CCP. Most likely both, and it could result in a major clash, and there can be reforms and significant growth for China. It will certainly be confusing, but it can bring a major economical change as well. China will continue to be strong, and then you have that Mahadasha, which changes in 2030 to the sun. And I do think that we may see potentially a war of some sort in 2028 to 2030. And whatever it is, it will be globally impactful, and China will be angry and aggressive. And it will want to get to the bottom of something. Honestly, I think the stage is being set right now for whatever is going to happen. May 2028 isn't a great time for the world, especially for finances, and that will get worse into 2029, where you could see some kind of global recession that impacts everyone. But 2030, it could be a sense of rebuilding. The sun is afflicted by Mars and Rahu, but it is in a good sign and house. In 2026, we're going to see Pluto make some direct aspects to the moon, and that's the public, and it sits in the 8th house. So there could be a significant amount of success and power in China, but equally you could see a great oppression of the people. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found China as interesting as I have. And I also hope I have you convinced that this is the chart that we should be using for China, as there is indeed an incredible change in the way that the nation behaved in the 80s, which supports a chart change. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.